Elena worked frantically through the night, the equations spilling beyond her windows onto her apartment walls. Her neighbors had fled hours ago, joining the exodus to rural areas where people clung to the desperate belief that distance from cities might spare them. The equation she was seeing contradicted everything she published, and everything the collective had presented. The next morning, she ventured outside for the first time since the announcement. The streets of Chicago were unrecognizable, storefronts shattered, vehicles abandoned at odd angles, military drones patrolling intersections. She pulled her hood tight and navigated around a smoldering barricade to reach the university's quantum physics building. The campus was deserted except for a lone security guard who recognized her. "Dr. Reyes, why are you still here?" he asked, eyes hollow with resignation. "I need more equipment," she said simply, not bothering to explain. What was the point? The world's most respected physicists had already declared the junction paradox unsolvable within human timeframes. In her old lab, she found what she needed, the specialized holographic display array she'd developed for her dissertation. As she disconnected it from the university's network, her department chair appeared in the doorway. "Stealing university property now, Elena." Professor Hammond leaned against the frame, his usual immaculate appearance disheveled. "I can solve it, James." She continued working, not looking up. Hammond laughed, a bitter sound. The collective's K800 and 12 computational arrays couldn't solve it in 10 centuries of processing. They're thought masters. Beings that evolved specifically for abstract mathematics couldn't solve it. But you, with your intuitive approach that couldn't even get you tenure, you'll solve it. Elena finally met his gaze. Their approach is flawed. They're so advanced they've become specialized, evolved into neurocognitive patterns. She gestured to the equation she'd scribbled across the whiteboard. "Look here, they're treating the junction points as fixed constants when they're clearly probabilistic fields." Hammond stepped closer, squinting at her notations. For a moment, his academic curiosity flickered behind the despair. "That's unconventional. The collective approaches problems with perfect logic, but the junction isn't logical, it's chaotic. They've evolved away from understanding chaos." She continued packing equipment. "I need people who think differently." Hammond helped her disconnect the final components. "You know they're watching us, monitoring communications. Whatever you're planning, they'll know. Let them watch." Elena lifted the heavy equipment. "They don't understand what they're seeing anyway." 3 days later, Elena had transformed her apartment into something between a mad scientist's laboratory and an artist's studio. Holographic equations floated in 3-dimensional space, while physical strings connected points of light projected onto her ceiling. She discovered that the junction paradox wasn't a physics problem at all. It was a translation problem. The mathematical language of hyperspace didn't conform to conventional physics. When her power cut out, the 3rd time that day as infrastructure failed across the city, Elena didn't stop. She mapped equations by candlelight, using colored string and pushpins. The pattern was revealing itself, showing glimpses of a solution that would require more than just her mind to complete. In the darkness of her apartment, with distant explosions punctuating the night as society unraveled, Elena felt something unexpected: hope. She'd need help, unconventional thinkers who could see patterns where others saw only chaos. She needed to find them quickly, before the collective realized that the primitive humans they had dismissed might possess the very cognitive abilities their hyper-specialized minds had evolved away from. As dawn broke over the fractured city, Elena packed her essential equipment and her notebooks. It was time to find the others. Marcus's underground workshop had once been a subway maintenance facility, abandoned during the transit collapse of the 2140s. Now it buzzed with jury-rigged equipment, power cables snaking across the floor, cooling systems cobbled together from refrigeration units, and walls covered in sketches that blended mechanical engineering with what looked like abstract art. "Your approach is wrong," Marcus told Elena as he soldered a connection on what appeared to be a modified fusion regulator. His hands moved with surgical precision despite their size. You're still thinking like a physicist. Alina bristled. The junction paradox is fundamentally a physics problem. No, Marcus didn't look up from his work. It's a relationship problem. Hiroshi, who had been silently coding in a workstation fashioned from salvaged gaming consoles, suddenly laughed. He's right, you know. You're treating the hyperspace junction like it's a barrier to overcome. It's not. It's a dance partner. Alina stared at them both. These men, a game designer and a mechanic, were suggesting approaches that contradicted every established principle of theoretical physics. Yet something in their words resonated with the patterns she'd begun seeing. "Show me," she said finally. Hiroshi activated his visualization engine, a repurposed gaming environment that translated the junction paradox equations into interactive three-dimensional forms. In my game engine, players don't beat complex systems by overpowering them. They synchronize with them. The holographic display showed the junction's gravitational anomalies, not as obstacles, but as flowing currents. What if we don't navigate around them? Hiroshi suggested, his fingers manipulating the display, but move with them. Before Alina could respond, the workshop's security system pinged. Marcus cursed, flipping a switch that killed all displays. "Collective observer," he muttered, checking a monitoring screen. Right on schedule. The massive doors slid open to admit Science Overseer Zixnar, accompanied by 2 drone recorders that immediately began scanning the workshop. The alien's exoskeleton clicked softly as he moved through the space, compound eyes reflecting the dim emergency lighting. "Primitive," the translation device at his thorax announced. "Inefficient." He gestured toward their equipment with a limb that moved with unsettling precision. "This approach has a 0.34% probability of success." Alina stepped forward, meeting his gaze despite the discomfort of looking into those alien eyes. "Your calculations don't account for human adaptability." "Adaptability is irrelevant to mathematical constants," Zixnar's translator responded. The alien turned to study Hiroshi's gaming setup with what might have been curiosity. "Explain this device's purpose." "Pattern recognition through nonlinear systems," Hiroshi said, deliberately using gaming terminology that wouldn't translate well. "Emergent solution mapping through chaos-responsive interfaces." The alien stared at him for 13 uncomfortable seconds. "Meaningless," the translator finally announced. But Alina noticed something, a slight change in the color pulsing beneath Zixnar's translucent carapace. Was that uncertainty? After the collective observer departed, Marcus secured the doors with additional makeshift locks. "He's reporting back more frequently now. They're getting nervous." "Good," Alina said, turning back to Hiroshi's display. "Show me again how the junction flows, if we treat it as a dynamic system rather than a static barrier." Hiroshi nodded, reactivating the simulation. This time, Alina saw it. The patterns weren't random at all. They were responsive, almost organic in their movements. Physics had taught her to overcome natural forces. Gaming had taught Hiroshi to harmonize with them. "We need to stop trying to break through the junction," she whispered, watching the gravitational currents flow. "We need to surf it." Marcus grinned, returning to his workbench. "Now you're thinking like a human." That night, while Alina and Hiroshi slept in the cots arranged in the workshop's corner, Marcus continued working. His hands moved steadily, building a physical prototype that matched the theories they were developing. A miniature hyperspace field generator that didn't fight against chaos but channeled it. By morning, the first working model was complete, beautiful in its asymmetry, functional in ways collective engineering would never have conceived. The impossible was beginning to look merely improbable. The Paradox game reached 100 million players by the end of its first week. Children in refugee camps played it on salvaged tablets. Engineers in bunkers accessed it during their rest periods. Even government officials, between crisis meetings, found themselves drawn to its addictive puzzle mechanics. None of them realized they were collectively solving humanity's salvation. In the workshop, Alina monitored the incoming data streams, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten as she watched the visualization of human cognition at work. The game's neural mapping function, Hiroshi's true genius, captured not just the solutions players found but the cognitive pathways they used to find them. "Look at this," she called to Marcus, who was retrofitting their power systems after the latest brownout. "The pattern recognition signatures are completely different from the collective's approach." She highlighted a particular cluster. "These players, mostly children under 12, are finding connections that don't follow any logical progression." Marcus squinted at the display. "They're making intuitive leaps." "Exactly," Elena said. "The collected species evolved toward perfect logical thinking, computational intelligence, but humans never specialized that way. We retained our capacity for illogical connections because our survival depended on adaptability, not perfection." A warning light flashed on their security system. Marcus checked the monitor and swore softly. "Military convoy approaching." And something else. Energy signatures matching collective technology. They had minutes at most. Elena transmitted their latest findings through the encrypted channel Thelma had provided. A quantum-entangled communication device hidden inside what appeared to be a broken coffee maker. Whether the Lyrian faction would use this information remained unclear, but it was their only insurance against what was coming. The workshop doors blew inward with enough force to bend the reinforced hinges. Armed soldiers poured through the opening, followed by Zixnar, whose normally methodical movements had acquired an urgency that made his exoskeleton click rapidly against itself. "Terminate all transmissions," the alien's translator demanded, its usual monotone replaced by a higher pitch. "By directive of Collective High Command, this research facility is now under quarantine." A military officer, Colonel Reeves by his insignia, stepped forward. "Dr. Rice, by order of Earth Unified Command, your research is classified. All data streams will cease immediately." Elena stood her ground as soldiers began disconnecting equipment. "The game network is global now. You can't shut it down without revealing what it really is." "We don't need to shut it down," Reeves replied. "We're redirecting the data to military servers." That was when Marcus made his move. In the confusion, he had positioned himself near their primary server bank. With an apologetic nod to Elena, he swung a metal pipe into the delicate equipment. Chaos erupted. Soldiers tackled Marcus while Zixnar's drones emitted high-pitched warning tones. Colonel Reeves shouted orders as the workshop's emergency protocols activated, sealing secondary systems. In the midst of this, Elena caught Hiroshi's eye. The game designer nodded almost imperceptibly, indicating the small device clutched in his palm, a backup drive containing their most crucial findings. Zixnar moved with unexpected speed to stand directly before Elena. Up close, she could see the alien's compound eyes shifting rapidly, analyzing her in ways human technology couldn't match. "You have discovered something," the translator said, its voice modulation suggesting something like suspicion, something unexpected. Elena made a split-second decision. "Your species' perfect logic is your greatest weakness," she said quietly. "You evolved away from understanding chaos, but chaos is where human minds thrive." The alien's posture changed subtly. "Demonstrate," the translator demanded. Elena nodded toward the one screen still active, displaying the global paradox player data in real time. The patterns of human problem-solving flowed like a living constellation, unpredictable yet harmonious. "Each of those points is a human mind finding pathways through chaos that your species cannot conceive," she explained. "We're not solving the junction paradox with better calculations. We're solving it through cognitive diversity, through approaches your evolutionary path abandoned millennia ago." For what seemed an eternity, Zixnar stood motionless, compound eyes fixed on the display. Then, in a gesture none of them expected, the alien deactivated his recording drones. "Continue," the translator said simply. Elena first met Thelma in an abandoned subway station, 3 levels below Marcus's workshop. The Lyrian had infiltrated Earth disguised as a diplomatic observer, risking execution by the collective for her actions. The alien's blue-tinged skin rippled with bioluminescent patterns that shifted with her emotions, currently displaying rapid pulses that Alina interpreted as anxiety. "Your military authorities are planning something catastrophic," Thelma said without preamble, her translator producing perfectly accented English. "They do not intend to share your solution with the collective. They plan to weaponize it." Alina had suspected as much since General Hawthorne's visit. "And your faction? What do they want?" Thelma's skin momentarily darkened. "The collective has grown. Stagnant. Perfect logic has led to perfect predictability. Innovation has slowed to near zero in the past millennium." The alien's four-fingered hand gestured expressively. "We believe humanity's cognitive approach could revitalize our civilization." "You want to study us," Alina said flatly. "We want to learn with you," Thelma corrected. "Your species sees connections where ours cannot. It is humbling." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant rumble of explosions above ground. Civil unrest had escalated as the deadline approached. Thelma winced visibly, her skin flaring bright orange. "Your emotions," Alina realized. "You feel them. Our emotions." "Lyrians are empathic," Thelma confirmed. "It is why I must meet you in isolated locations. The collective emotional state of your species is overwhelming." Understanding dawned on Alina. "That's why the collective initially dismissed us. Your governing species can't process emotional thinking." Thelma's skin shifted to a thoughtful blue-green. "The dominant collective species evolved toward pure logic, yes. They consider emotional cognition primitive, an evolutionary stage to outgrow." Her four eyes blinked in sequence. "But we Lyrians recognize it as different, not inferior. Your emotional processing allows cognitive leaps that logical progression cannot achieve." Their meeting was cut short by Alina's secure communicator. Marcus's voice came through, tense and hurried. "Corporate strike team at the north entrance. Military drones at the south. Whatever you're planning, do it fast." Back at the workshop, they found Hiroshi fending off a team of corporate lawyers armed with both legal documents and actual weapons. Desmond Zhao's conglomerate had secured a court order claiming ownership of all hyperspace research, a claim backed by private security forces attempting to secure the premises. Through the chaos of the next hours, Alina witnessed something remarkable. As word spread through the Paradox game network that their research facility was under threat, ordinary citizens began appearing. At first dozens, then hundreds gathered outside, forming a human barricade that the corporate security team couldn't legally disperse without creating an international incident. But it was what happened next that truly demonstrated humanity's unique adaptability. When collective-level weapons, clearly provided illegally to Zhao's forces, were deployed, the crowd didn't scatter. Instead, they implemented countermeasures no one had planned or coordinated. Reflective emergency blankets appeared, redirecting targeting systems. Household smoke devices created patterns that confused motion sensors. Most remarkably, the crowd moved in synchronized patterns that seemed random but effectively neutralized automated targeting algorithms. Patterns that, Alina realized with awe, had emerged spontaneously from their collective response to threat. Later, reviewing security footage with Marcus, Alina identified the moment everything changed. A teenage girl with no apparent special training had analyzed the weapon's targeting pattern and began a movement sequence that others instinctively followed, a human algorithm created on the fly. "This is what the collective can't compute," Marcus said softly. "This is why we need to build the ship." Alina watched the footage again. The patterns of movement, the intuitive response to threat, the collective adaptation without central coordination, it was all reflected in their hyperspace equations. Human cognition at its most powerful wasn't individual genius but collective adaptability. "You're right," she finally agreed. "Solving the paradox theoretically isn't enough. We need to show them what humanity can build, Not just a solution, but a physical manifestation of our approach. She looked at the crude sketches Marcus had been developing. We need to build the improbable. Within hours, the call went out through the gang network. Humanity would not just solve the equation. They would build the impossible. The Santiago Stadium in Chile became the improbable's unlikely birthplace. Its location, a seismically active region with natural geothermal vents, provided both power and the gravitational irregularities needed for hyperspace field testing. Within days of Elena's global call, the stadium transformed into humanity's most extraordinary workshop. Elena stood on the observation platform, watching teams from 6 continents working simultaneously on different sections of the vessel. Traditional engineering hierarchies had been abandoned by necessity. No single authority coordinated the efforts. Instead, a fluid, self-organizing system had emerged where expertise determined leadership moment by moment. 4 minutes, shouted Sun Wei, a 17-year-old chemistry prodigy from Shanghai. Her team had been attempting to synthesize the quantum-stabilized alloy that collective engineers insisted required specialized equipment unavailable on Earth. Around her makeshift lab, constructed from school equipment and modified kitchen appliances, researchers from 3 countries watched as she adjusted the pressure in a series of connected devices that resembled pressure cookers more than industrial forges. The timer on her tablet counted down as the mixture glowed with increasing intensity. The molecular alignment won't hold, predicted a collective observer, one of 3 permitted by the increasingly nervous Overseer Council to monitor the project. Your containment field is inadequate. Sun Wei didn't bother responding. Instead, she tapped commands on her tablet, activating the final sequence. The entire assembly began vibrating at a specific frequency, derived from one of Hiroshi's game environment simulations, as the molecular structure of the alloy rearranged itself. When the timer reached 0, the equipment powered down with a series of descending tones. Sun Wei approached cautiously, opened the main chamber, and extracted a small, silvery disc that shimmered with an opalescent quality. She held it up with a triumphant smile. Quantum stabilized. Better density ratio than the collective standard. She tossed it to the stunned alien observer, who caught it reflexively. We'll have the full hull sections ready by tomorrow. Across the stadium floor, similar scenes played out as impossible deadlines were met through methods no traditional engineer would have attempted. A team led by Kenyan environmental scientists had perfected atmospheric recyclers using modified jungle plant biology. Brazilian street racers worked alongside Romanian mathematicians to develop navigation systems that responded to intuitive human controls rather than computational precision. Elena made her way to where Marcus directed the central assembly, the heart of the improbable. Unlike the elegant symmetry of collective vessels, their ship was taking shape as something almost organic, with asymmetrical curves and seemingly random protrusions that somehow worked in harmony. We're incorporating Sun Wei's alloy directly into the hyperspace field generator, Marcus explained, his hands black with mechanical fluid. The molecular memory properties allow for adaptive field configurations that no pre-programmed system could achieve. Will it work? Elena asked, watching as the central chamber, designed to channel the hyperspace energies, was installed by a team of oil rig workers whose experience with deep-sea pressure systems had proven unexpectedly relevant. Marcus wiped his hands on his already stained shirt. By all conventional engineering standards, absolutely not. He grinned, but we're not using conventional standards. The most dramatic confrontation came when Zixnar himself arrived to inspect the nearly completed central propulsion system. The alien moved slowly around the assemblage of components, many of which had been repurposed from entirely different technologies. His recording drones cataloged everything, occasionally emitting warning tones when they encountered configurations that violated collective engineering principles. This configuration cannot achieve hyperspace transition, Zixnar's translator announced as he completed his inspection. The harmonics are non-standard. The field generators lack symmetrical balance. The control systems are. The translator paused, apparently struggling to find an equivalent term. Inappropriately interactive. Elena stepped forward. They're meant to be. Your automated systems are designed to eliminate variables. Ours are designed to incorporate them. Zixnar's compound eyes focused on her with unsettling intensity. You intend the human pilot to be part of the system. It wasn't a question. Not just part of it. Elena confirmed. Essential to it. Our solution requires human intuition in real time. The alien stood motionless for nearly a full minute, his exoskeleton clicking occasionally as internal processes Elena could only guess at took place. Finally, his translator activated again. We have fundamentally misunderstood your species, Zixnar stated. Your technological achievement is not your tools. It is your relationship with them. The final assembly of the Improbable coincided with Elena's team completing their theoretical solution to the junction paradox. In the stadium's repurposed press box, now a command center filled with mismatched equipment, Elena presented their findings to a mixed audience of human authorities and collective observers. The fundamental error in previous approaches, she explained, gesturing to the holographic display Hiroshi had programmed, was treating gravitational anomalies as obstacles to be overcome through computational force. Our solution instead recognizes them as dynamic energy patterns to be harmonized with. The display showed traditional hyperspace navigation as a rigid pathway, forcing its way through distortion fields. In contrast, their approach resembled something closer to surfing, flowing with the gravitational waves, using their energy rather than fighting against it. We call it quantum surfing, Elena continued, nodding to Marcus, who had coined the term. But here's the critical element. It cannot be fully automated. The gravitational patterns shift in ways that require real-time intuitive responses. A human pilot, working in conjunction with adaptive systems, must make continuous adjustments based on sensory feedback that computers alone cannot interpret. General Hawthorne, who had reluctantly allowed the project to continue under military observation, stepped forward. You're saying the solution requires humans to remain part of the equation permanently, that we can't simply hand this technology over to the collective and be done with it. Precisely, Elena confirmed. The human cognitive element isn't just helpful, it's essential. The implications spread through the room like a shockwave. If Elena's team was correct, humanity wouldn't just be solving the theoretical problem. They would be making themselves indispensable to interstellar travel through the junction. That night, as final preparations for the Improbable's test run continued, Thelma infiltrated the secured facility to meet Elena and her team in a maintenance tunnel beneath the stadium. You must leave immediately, the Lyrian whispered, her skin flickering with urgent patterns of red and orange. The collective never intended to honor any solution you provided. What do you mean? Elena demanded. The High Council classified the junction paradox as theoretically unsolvable 3 centuries ago. Thelma explained, 4 eyes blinking in distress. The 6-month deadline was merely formality, a way to appear reasonable while proceeding with their predetermined course. Relocation protocols were initiated the day they arrived. Marcus swore quietly. You mean relocation camps? Extinction facilities. Thelma corrected, skin darkening to a deep purple. My faction discovered this truth only days ago. The dominant council species considers humanity too unpredictable to preserve, even on outer rim worlds. Elena felt ice forming in her stomach. Then our solution doesn't matter. It never did. It matters more than ever, Hiroshi interjected. His usual calm demeanor hardened into resolve. If we can prove humans are essential to hyperspace navigation, they will ignore it, Thelma interrupted. Official findings have been predetermined. Your world has 11 days remaining, not the 2 months still publicly stated. Silence fell as the implications sank in. Everything they had worked for, the theoretical breakthroughs, the impossible engineering feats, was meaningless if the collective had already decided humanity's fate. Then Marcus spoke, his voice quiet but firm. We launch now. The ship isn't ready, Elena protested. Life support is only partially functional. The hyperspace field generator hasn't been properly calibrated. It doesn't need to be perfect, Marcus replied. It just needs to work well enough to get us to their homeworld. We take the fight to them. Hiroshi nodded slowly. The Paradox Game Network. We could broadcast our journey in real time, not just to Earth, but to all collective worlds. A public demonstration they can't ignore or suppress. Elena realized, the possibilities expanding in her mind. But it's suicide. The ship isn't ready for a full hyperspace journey. Marcus's expression was grim. We're dead anyway if we stay. At least this way, we control how our story ends. As they debated their desperate plan, alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. Security monitors showed collective ships moving into low-orbit positions, the beginning of containment protocols that would precede the extinction process. Decision made, Marcus said flatly. We go now or not at all. Within hours, a hastily assembled crew prepared to board the Improbable. 12 volunteers representing Earth's diverse problem-solving approaches joined Elena, Hiroshi, and Marcus on what might well be a one-way journey. The last person to board was Dr. Adebayo, a Cambridge-educated structural engineer who had lost his family during the initial panic. They called this ship Impossible, he said quietly as he stepped through the airlock. Let's show them what impossible really means. The Improbable's launch violated every safety protocol established in spaceflight history. As collective ships moved to blockade Earth's orbital paths, Marcus engaged the main engines, untested systems roaring to life with an ominous vibration that rattled the asymmetrical hull. Structural integrity at 84%, reported Dr. Adebayo from his jury-rigged monitoring station. Hull temperature rising but within projected parameters. Elena occupied the navigator's position, a modified acceleration couch surrounded by holographic displays that Hiroshi had designed to translate hyperspace distortions into visual and tactile feedback. Her hands rested on control interfaces that resembled artistic sculptures more than traditional flight controls. Collective vessels establishing pursuit vectors, called Maya Chen, a former air traffic controller whose spatial awareness had made her invaluable to the team. 3 capital ships converging on our position. The Improbable shuddered as it climbed through the upper atmosphere, pushed beyond its design limitations by necessity. Marcus worked the propulsion controls with intuitive adjustments that no flight manual could have prescribed, feeling the ship's responses like an extension of his own body. Approaching hyperspace transition point, Elena announced, studying the chaotic patterns forming in the displays around her. The mathematics of quantum surfing were theoretical until this moment. Equations that existed only in simulations were about to be tested against the harsh reality of actual hyperspace. Primary navigation system failing, announced Dr. Calloway, their systems specialist. Quantum fluctuations exceeding calibration parameters. In a traditional vessel, this would have triggered an immediate abort. Instead, Amit Singh, the sound engineer whose congenital blindness had led him to develop extraordinary auditory processing abilities, stepped forward. Reroute the distortion feedback through the audio subsystem, he instructed, fingers dancing across his specialized interface. I can hear the patterns. Maya looked skeptical but complied, redirecting the sensor data through the entertainment system's audio processors. Immediately, the cabin filled with an otherworldly symphony, the acoustic translation of hyperspace distortions. Amit closed his eyes, head slightly tilted. There, he said confidently, F-sharp diminished ninth. That's our entry point. His fingers tapped a rhythm on his console. The junction has a harmonic structure. It's not random at all. Elena glanced at Hiroshi, who nodded in amazement. Mathematical patterns expressing as audio frequencies. We never thought to listen to the equations. Following Amit's acoustic guidance, Elena adjusted their approach vector. The Improbable aligned with an invisible current in spacetime that conventional instruments couldn't detect, but somehow manifested as a distinct tonal pattern. Hyperspace field generator online, Marcus announced. Commencing transition in 3, 2, 1. The universe folded around them. Through the viewports, reality distorted as the improbable slipped between dimensions in a way no collective vessel ever had, not forcing its way through hyperspace, but harmonizing with it. For 37 glorious seconds, they surfed the quantum currents, the ship responding to Elena's intuitive adjustments as she followed Emmett's ongoing tonal guidance. Then catastrophe struck. Quantum stabilizers failing. Dr. Adebayo shouted as warning lights flooded the cabin. Field coherence dropping below sustainable levels. The improbable lurched violently, throwing crew members against restraints. Through the cacophony of alarms, Elena heard Hiroshi's voice, strangely calm. "I've seen this pattern before," he said, fingers flying across his console. "In my simulation games. Level 94, the Labyrinth of Chaos." He brought up a display showing patterns eerily similar to the destabilization they were experiencing. "It's not random failure. The hyperspace field is responding to our stabilization attempts by becoming more chaotic. We're fighting it again instead of flowing with it," Elena realized. She turned to Rebecca White, the championship chess player whose computational thinking had earned her a place on the crew. "Calculate alternative power configurations. We need to stop trying to stabilize and start adapting." Rebecca closed her eyes, mentally mapping the complex interactions between systems. Reroute power from sectors 5 and 8. Reduce stabilizer output to 42%. Increase field variability tolerance by a factor of 3. As Marcus implemented these counterintuitive changes, the ship's violent shuddering gradually subsided. The hyperspace field, instead of being forced into stability, now pulsed with controlled chaos, adapting to the currents rather than opposing them. "It's working," Elena breathed, watching as the navigation displays showed them slipping deeper into hyperspace. "We're not just surviving the jump. We're riding it." Outside the viewports, the impossible beauty of hyperspace revealed itself, not the sterile tunnels depicted in collective educational materials, but a living, shifting realm of energy and pattern that responded to their presence like a sentient entity. Through the Paradox Network, billions watched in real time as humanity achieved what the collective had declared impossible, navigating hyperspace not through perfect computational precision, but through a harmonious dance of intuition, adaptation, and controlled chaos. The improbable emerged from hyperspace in a shower of quantum particles, its hull glowing with residual energy as it limped toward the collective capital world of Harmonium. The journey had exacted a terrible toll. 3 crew members injured, life support failing in 2 sections, and primary power reserves depleted beyond safe limits. Through viewports streaked with hyperspace residue, they beheld Harmonium, a world encircled by crystalline structures that formed a perfect mathematical lattice, home to the collective's ruling council. Defense platforms activating, Maya reported, her voice steady despite the dire readings on her displays. Targeting systems locked on our position. Broadcast status, Elena asked, turning to Hiroshi. "The Paradox Network is live," he confirmed. 17 billion viewers across Earth and... He paused, checking a secondary display that tracked their signal distribution. At least a dozen collective worlds. "They're watching." Before anyone could respond, the ship shuddered as tractor beams locked onto its hull. On the command screens, dozens of collective vessels converged on their position. The improbable had made it to the heart of the collective, but they were now effectively prisoners. "All channels open," Elena ordered. "Transmit our solution to the junction paradox. The complete dataset, methodology, everything." Hiroshi nodded, executing the command that sent their hard-won knowledge flooding across every available communication channel. Not just the mathematical solution, but the human process that produced it. The intuitive leaps, the collaborative chaos, the trial and error that no collective species would have attempted. As the transmission completed, the view screens activated with an incoming communication. The being that appeared was unlike any collective representative they had encountered, a swirling gaseous entity contained within a crystalline housing. Translator text identified it as Grand Theorist Vauxhall, the collective's supreme scientific authority. Humans a vessel improbable. The translation read beneath the shifting patterns of gas. Your presence violates 67 established protocols. Your vessel's configuration violates 322 engineering principles. Your transmission violates everything we understand about problem-solving methodology. A pause. You will explain. Elena stepped forward, facing the entity with quiet dignity despite her exhaustion. We didn't know it was impossible. The translator paused, as if processing this unexpected response. Clarify. Your certainty was your limitation, Elena continued. Your perfect logic told you the junction paradox couldn't be solved, so you stopped truly trying. Our doubt was our strength. Humans have always questioned what's possible because our history is full of impossible things becoming reality. The grand theorist's gaseous form swirled more rapidly. Your solution incorporates methodologies we cannot replicate because you evolved away from them, Elena explained. Your species pursued perfect logical thought, creating minds that function like perfect computational engines. Humans evolved differently. We balanced logic with intuition, precision with adaptation. Behind her, Marcus stepped forward. You built a civilization on certainty. We built ours on overcoming doubt. A new alert sounded through the ship's systems. Outside, through the viewports, they could see thousands of civilian vessels converging on their position, small ships from dozens of collective species forming a protective cordon around the improbable. Leading them were distinctly Lyrian vessels, their hulls adorned with symbols that translator programs identified as representing cognitive diversity. On a secondary screen, reports streamed in of unprecedented events across the collective. Public demonstrations on 7 worlds, academic institutions issuing statements supporting human methodology, and most shockingly, a formal vote of no confidence proposed in the Collective Council for the first time in 7 millennia. The grand theorist's communication abruptly cut off, replaced by a formal notification. An emergency assembly had been convened to address the human question. The improbable and its crew were to be presented as primary evidence. As they were escorted toward the orbital assembly chamber, a massive structure that served as the collective's governing center, Elena turned to her exhausted crew. What we've done goes beyond solving the junction paradox, she told them. We've introduced chaos into a system that eliminated it centuries ago. We've shown them a different way of thinking, a different way of being. She managed a tired smile. Whatever happens next, we've already changed the collective forever. The assembly chamber doors parted before them, revealing thousands of representatives from every collective species. At the center stood the High Council, 9 beings representing the dominant logical species that had guided collective evolution for millennia. What followed would be recorded as the Assembly of Reconsideration, the moment when the most advanced civilization in known space faced its greatest philosophical crisis, forced to confront the possibility that perfect logic was not, after all, the pinnacle of cognitive evolution.